This video is going to be all about taking my 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon over the Rubicon Trail. I'm going to tell you what I learned, what I damaged, and what I would do differently if I had the chance. Now, hopefully by now you guys have had a chance to watch our latest On the Trail video where I went with Harry Wagner and Bob Sweeney over the Rubicon Trail. That was a very cool trip. We filmed that in, I guess it was end of August of 2022. The trail was really fantastic and perfect weather for wheeling and camping. Now, the first thing that I did when I got to the trailhead was air down my tires. Now, I'm running a 40 by 1350 Nitto Trail Grappler. It's mounted on a 17 by 8.5 Trail Ready beadlock. Now, typically, if I don't have a ton of things inside of the Jeep, I've usually ran around 8 PSI. That gives the tire a giant footprint, makes it ride really well, and it hooks up very well. The thing that I just didn't factor in as well as I should have when I hit the Rubicon was how much extra weight over what I normally wheel with I had in the vehicle. Not only did I have my spare parts and all of my stuff that I needed for a 10-day adventure, but we had my buddy Michael that was with me, all of his stuff. We had a ton of camera gear in, not only my stuff, but the guys that were actually filming the On the Trail used, I was the only guy with the truck there, so ended up loading up a lot of their gear, and it really loaded this thing down. And 8 PSI was probably a little bit lower than I needed to be for all of that extra weight. If I had to do again, I probably would have done maybe 13 to 15 PSI. And I know that might sound crazy, but with all of the weight of this vehicle, you really don't need to go down as low. And as much as I drug the belly of this thing, I think having a little bit of extra PSI on the tires probably would have helped with that. Now, obviously I did not have my MITS alloy bed on when I did the Rubicon trip, and if I had, I wouldn't have had to worry about the taillights so much. Now, one thing I had been told by a few friends that had taken Rubicon Gladiators on the Rubicon Trail, go ahead and pull your rear taillights. I sort of figured, well, if I got into a spot that looked a little hairy, I'd just hop out and did it. I just didn't want the taillights out for the whole time, and I should have listened to them, because within maybe 4 miles of being on the trail, already hit the rear tail light, cracked it on the passenger side. So my word of advice, if you've got a Gladiator, I'd go ahead and pull the tail lights. That's just my 2 cents. There's 2 bolts on each side, 1 plug. It's not going to give you a bunch of error lights, and if it does, who cares? At least you're not going to break these really expensive rear tail lights. Now, another sort of thing that I guess it's worth talking about is really the departure angle of the Gladiator and some of the things that I faced, which really wasn't that big of a deal. So I hit the receiver hitch a ton. That's just par for the course with these things. You know, I don't feel like it was doing any like frame damage, but you definitely smack it and drag it an absolute ton on this thing. And I was hitting my rear bumper a lot, and along with that, I was hitting my rear corner guards. And I did do a little damage to the bumper on the passenger side, kind of dented it a little bit. Most of it was just a lot of scrapes. So, you know, if you're worried about that, you know, maybe look at an aftermarket rear bumper. To me, it wasn't that big of a deal, mostly because I knew I was going to be upgrading to this. You know, the Gladiator really needs some help in the back, especially when you're super low. In terms of skid plates and things like that, I actually don't have any aftermarket skid plates under the Jeep. I just have the factory Rubicon ones. I'm not a huge fan of aftermarket skid plates. I just feel like most of the time they add unnecessary weight. They make it really a pain to service and inspect things, and they trap a lot of heat. And I scraped my frame rail a lot. I scraped the factory gas tank skid, definitely hit the transfer case skid, but I never damaged anything. I got back home, cleaned it all up, and spray painted it, and everything's been fine since then. So I don't think I would worry too much about having a ton of skids. The only real problem or challenge that I had on the Rubicon was on the Little Sluice. Now, you have the old sluice, which is pretty gnarly, and based off of Bob's recommendations, he was just like, look, it's pretty tore up right now. I don't think we should take a Gladiator through it. I think you're going to lose a bedside. I've seen other videos of Gladiators going through there. I took Bob's advice. I trust him a lot. He's the president of the Jeepers Jamboree. If anybody's going to tell you, hey, I probably wouldn't take that through there, I'm going to listen to him. So did not go through that, but I did want to do the Little Sluice at the very least. The Little Sluice wasn't too bad. I think maybe a better line choice if I'd gone a little to the right. I ended up having to winch out of the spot that I was in. Really wasn't a big deal. I mean, I've got a winch, why not use it? I did come down on my rear sway bar link. I just was in a weird spot, and it landed on it. That bent the rear link and a little portion of the framework comes down. I've learned that Metal Cloak actually makes a reinforcement for that. I've since fixed it. It's working fine now. I did have to, do the rest of the trail and drive back cross country without the rear sway bar link. That really wasn't that big of a deal. Not really anything I could have done about that. I don't think necessarily you really need to take your rear sway bar off. It is a low hanging thing on the Gladiator, and even though my Pro Rock actually raises up the rear sway bar a bit over if I had, like a Ultimate Dana 60 keeps it in the same spot, and the stock Dana 44 keeps that sway bar mount in the same spot. I still hit it. So something to think about. A Curry anti-rock would definitely keep things out of the way, but that's not what I had when I took the trip. Now I get a lot of questions on this Jeep about why I'm still running these stock Rubicon sliders. Aren't I worried about damaging the body? And the truth is, I really like how tight these stick to the body. They work pretty well. I did smash this one pretty good coming down on a rock, but it didn't push it into the body. I don't have any issues from that. I just sanded it down, touched it up with some paint, and honestly, if I mess these things up, I can go buy another set from like Facebook Marketplace for like 150 bucks. The only really body damage, so to speak, that happened on the trail was right here on my back passenger door. A rock had actually slid down. Bob was saying he thought maybe even the night before we hit it, and it really didn't give me a lot of option to pivot this thing around. Bob and Harry were both basically in TJs, which are much narrower, so they didn't have an issue with it. I ended up banging up my door a good bit. I could fix it, but it's kind of like a cool Rubicon Trail scar, so it's fine. If I was to do the trail again, or if I live closer, I would love to do that trail with half doors. I've done it with half doors in the past. I've actually done it with no doors, and that's a really good trail for that. Me being cross country, I had no place to like store my doors or anything, so that really wasn't an option. But I wouldn't really worry about body damage too much if you got a Gladiator in terms of at least your side doors. I did get a few scratches, but nothing like, oh man, I'm super bummed about. Now the Rubicon is definitely a camping trail. I knew we would spend at least 2 nights on the trail camping, potentially 3, so I wanted to make sure that I would be comfortable and I had enough gear and water and all that stuff for that. And that was kind of one of my biggest challenges for this trip was when I put my ARB Simpson Series 3 on the back of the Gladiator. The tent works great and it's fairly comfortable. It's a little bit of a pain to unzip and that stuff, but my kids like it, and I'm used to having it on the back. What I'm not used to doing is driving cross country with it and having to deal with taking all of my spare parts and keeping fluids and spare parts and things like that in containers, so none of the stuff would get wet or messed up along the way. And I was on the fence whether to keep that tent on there or just pull that setup off and do my best top, super top for trucks. It's on the back of my Gator Gladiator, and toss it on just to have more dry storage. And if I had to do it again, I would do just that. Put the best top, soft top for trucks on the back, go with my tent cot, and shave a little bit of weight out of the back, but more realistically, what was important to me was just dry storage. I ran my fridge inside of the Jeep, which was perfectly fine, but we ended up having to stack a ton of stuff on top of it and around it, just for all the gear that we were taking. And if I had that much more extra room in the back, I could have put everything back there, and I think it would have made everything a little bit more organized. It would have lightened up a little bit of the load of what I was taking. So as crazy as it sounds for a Jeep that says tent Jeep on the back, I probably would not have done, or I wouldn't do my rooftop tent again there with that particular setup. I would just go lighter with a backpack tent or my tent cot and shave a little bit of weight just to get that dry storage more than anything else. The only thing that was weird that happened along the way on the trail is I noticed that every now and again my steering would feel suddenly heavy, like something wasn't right, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I got off the trail, I didn't see anything obvious, nothing loose, drove all the way back cross country, everything was fine. And it wasn't until I took the Jeep off-road again with my kids that I realized what had happened. My ram at the axle was rocking loose and had rotated where the hoses were getting smashed between the drag link and tie rod. And what's crazy is I usually don't film when I have my kids. We go wheel. It's just a let's go wheel. I'm not out to document every moment of my life. But I happened to put up the drone because the kids were like, hey, like put the drone up real quick, you know. And I was like, okay. So I did that. And sure enough, it caught when it happened, when the line pinched and it finally couldn't take anymore. It split the line open. And that was a lot of fun. It was just me and my 2 kids, so we had to fix that. Here, I'll show you the real quick behind the scenes of what happened there. So here's the prognosis. Kids are having fun. Hey, kids. Hey, kids. Tools are out. So, of course, the time that I decided, let's just do a quick trip with the kids, I blow a power steering line. Apparently, I've ripped one of these lower lines. I have no way to fix the line necessarily, so I'm waiting right now for everything to cool down, and I actually keep these little caps with me to fix it. So I got this off. The lines right there are the ones I have to cap. Everything, of course, is super hot because we've been wheeling all morning, and get this thing fixed, and I'll follow up with a part 2. Right, so update, got the caps on the gearbox. Didn't have quite enough fluid, so came to the outpost and been adding fluid, turning it off, cycling it back and forth, trying to bleed this thing out so we can head back to Wilmington. So we ended up getting it fixed, or I fixed it as best I could, put fluid in it, we drove home, ended up swapping out the power steering lines for new lines and rotated the ram back up, and it hasn't been an issue since then. But I did learn that was what's going on. In terms of having hydro assist on the trail, I think it was a very wise move. With low pressure and a lot of grip from these tires and that rock, hydro assist for me, I think was well worth it, especially if you're going to run a 40. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Please feel free to drop a comment if you got any questions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all that good stuff that really helps the channel grow. And if you got any questions for me, you can always find me at Ali Mansour Editor on Instagram. All right, until next time, I hope you guys are doing well. Take care. Bye-bye.